Welcome to It's All Geek to Me, a podcast where two friends experience popular nerdy franchises for the first time. My name is Leah, and this season my co-host Kelli and I will be traveling to a galaxy far, far away as Kelli experiences Star Wars for the very first time. And I'm the expert. Let's dive in. Back we are for another episode. Do you like my Yoda voice?
Oh my gosh. Do not get me started. I have so many things that I need to say and get off my chest, but I'm gonna put that in a little box for now.
Oh my
I'm gonna
gosh.
put it on the back burner. Let's get into it. We watched the second third of the movie, I would say. We're getting right to the juicy part.
Juicy.
This was an interesting section.
It was.
And I have a lot of thoughts on it. I laughed. I cried.
Did you cry?
I didn't actually cry.
Oh, okay.
Well, I wanted to. I'll tell you when. It's not when you would expect, that's for sure.
There was actually one section in this film that made me want to cry, but I didn't cry.
Which section?
When we get there, maybe it's the same one.
I will say, though, I was being a little facetious because I was talking about the Yoda reveal. But we'll talk about it. We'll talk about it. No spoilers.
But we do. I mean, it's right at the beginning of this section. He gets to Dagobah.
Let me set the scene for you, okay?
Tell us. Set the scene.
We're with Luke on this bog planet, and he is pulling all of his stuff from the jet that's, crashed into the water. And it looks like he's setting up a base with R2-D2. He has to charge him up. So he's setting him up, and he says he's got to find Yoda if he even exists. And he says, this seems like a strange place to find a Jedi Master. And I was actually thinking at this point, this reminded me a little bit of one of my favorite TV shows of all time, Avatar: The Last Airbender, which I know you have also seen. And I was thinking about how I feel like this is a very, very mild spoiler for the second season, but Aang has a vision of an earthbending master in this bog, and he has to find her. And I was just thinking, that's so interesting. I wonder if it's like a very slight reference to Star Wars,
Yeah.
Anyway, Luke is getting a little, I don't know, he's getting the heebie-jeebies, I guess you could say. And he says, I feel like, and then we hear a voice behind him that says, feel like what?
Feel like what?
And Luke turns around with his blaster out and he says, feels like we're being watched. Leah, when I tell you, I ripped out my headphones and screamed. I have never in my life felt so betrayed by what I thought in my mind a character was going to be. Let me tell you. I knew what Yoda looked like, okay? I've always known what Yoda looked like. He's a very popular figure, but I have never in my lifetime, I have never heard him speak.
That's so surprising.
I have never heard anybody do a Yoda voice, because I hear people be like, trust the Force, you will, in that backwards kind of way he speaks.
Yeah.
Never heard anybody do that voice. Did not know. I was like, no, that's not Yoda.
Oh my
that
God.
cannot be Yoda.
What'd you think he sounded like? Sup, guys, it's Yoda.
No, I thought he was going to sound like this, because he's old looking, right?
Yeah.
I thought he was going to be kind of like how Gandalf sounds, maybe a little Dumbledore-y, hello, young Luke, I'm going to save you.
This is something totally different.
When I heard that voice, I absolutely lost my mind. I was screaming. I almost started crying because I was like, he's putting on a voice. This has to be a joke.
No, that is Yoda.
I couldn't write anything down from this scene because I was so overwhelmed. I was absolutely freaking out. I just wrote down in all caps, his voice is tragic. And don't get me wrong. I mean, it's a voice, but it's just not, I literally cannot believe that is what he sounds like. I refuse to believe it.
I think it's so cute. You don't like it?
There have been a lot of moments in this franchise so far. I know we haven't experienced that much of it, but there's been a lot of moments that I have thought, this is really not like what I expected Star Wars to be. I thought it was going to be much more serious. I thought Princess Leia was going to be much more damsel in distress. I thought that Han Solo was going to be a good guy, not like a kind of anti-hero kind of guy. I thought Luke Skywalker was going to be a non-emo adult, but nothing has prepared me
Not emo adults.
For experiencing Yoda's voice.
Oh my
if there's
gosh.
anybody in this world, in this galaxy, who has experienced Star Wars for the first time, there's got to be somebody else on the planet who's never heard Yoda speak before, because this cannot be my own solitary experience. Somebody else has to be shocked.
I'm sure there's someone.
I had to pause the movie. I ran screaming to find my partner Ryan, and I was like, I cannot believe what just happened in this movie. I heard Yoda's voice and I cannot handle it. And he was like, he reminded me that we've watched this show called The In-Betweeners. Have you seen it?
Oh, yeah.
And there's one point, oh gosh, I can't believe I'm even mentioning this. There's one point where this one nerdy guy is doing an impression of Yoda and he goes, "Feisty one you are."
Yeah.
And I died laughing when I heard that, because I was like, what the heck was that? I did not know that he was doing a Yoda voice. I was like, this guy's a loser, because I thought he was just doing that voice for no reason.
That was his way of flirting.
And Ryan was like, you have heard the Yoda voice before. You heard that guy do an impression. And I was like, no freaking way. How could I have known that that's what Yoda sounds like?
And especially with the In-Betweeners, like, if anyone hasn't seen that show, it follows these four guys that are supposed to be like the nerdiest, terrible with women guys that you've ever met. So I could see you hearing him do that voice and just think he was like badly flirting.
Yeah, 100%. I thought that was just like him like trying to be sexy in some way. Leah, I do not know how we can do the rest of this episode because I cannot get past it. I just physically cannot get. It feels like a wall has been erected in front of me, and it's a big Yoda wall that's going, "Feisty one you are," and I can't get past it.
So you didn't write notes for this scene? I did.
Let me tell you, I was still in shock, so I probably missed a lot, but I wrote down that this must be Yoda, although he has not revealed that he's Yoda yet, and he tells Luke to put his weapon away and that he's going to help him, and Luke's like, "You probably can't help me. I'm looking for a great warrior." And Yoda is like, I don't know, I didn't write down what he said, but he was laughing at him and he starts eating.
He's almost like mocking him, like, a great warrior here.
Yeah, he's mocking. And again, I was like, he has to be putting on a voice. He has to be putting on a voice. This is not what Yoda sounds like.
His voice does change like a little bit when he like reveals himself as Yoda. It like calms down a little.
Yeah, when he is talking about a very grave situation later in this section, he doesn't sound as much like such a character.
Yeah.
I wrote down he's just a little old guy. He goes over, he starts eating Luke's food, and Luke's like, "What the heck? Like, stop eating my food." He pulls it away. Yoda's poking around, touching everything, grabs a lamp. R2 tries to grab it back. They get in a fight, and Yoda's like, mine. And I'm just like, this has to be a joke.
It wasn't a joke.
Leah's messing with me. She did something to change this film a little bit just to mess with me for the sake of the podcast, because this cannot be Yoda. I was expecting such a serious, gravelly...
But you know what? You wrote him off just the same way that Luke wrote him off. And you know what? Size doesn't matter, Kelly, as he says later.
I actually wrote down my thoughts on that as well, which we'll get into, because I did write him off. But yeah, I wrote, Yoda keeps on effing with his stuff, and Luke is getting so mad, and he's, saying how he wants to leave the planet.
Luke also called the planet a slimy mudhole, and Yoda was like, "Slimy mudhole? It's my home." I thought that was sad, because he was like making fun of his home.
You thought that was sad? I thought that was, again, just part of like, everything was colored with a hilarious lens to me in this moment. So when he said that, I was cracking up. Because I was like, of course you would be offended by that, you little gremlin.
But then in the end, Luke does say he's looking for Yoda. And then Yoda says, "I know Yoda, but we need to eat first." So he's like, we gotta go eat.
Yes.
He leaves R2 behind, and R2 like starts like screaming. He like does not want to stay. And that's that scene. So you got most of it. You made it past the voice.
I'm gonna compartmentalize. I'm gonna stuff that part of myself very far down into my subconscious so that I can continue the episode, because I don't think that we can get through an entire episode of me just wailing about how Yoda's voice is not what I expected.
Yeah, we can't. We can
try.
We gotta move on.
Honestly, when I paused it at the first when he was like, put down your weapons, I paused it and I was like, we need to do a special bonus episode that's just 5 minutes long of me screaming, because I don't think that I can move past this moment until I freak out for a while. But it's fine.
Oh my gosh.
We're past it. We're past it. I'm just going to pretend that his voice is normal and we'll just move on past it. It's totally fine.
And we cut to C-3PO on the Falcon.
And he is talking about how the Falcon has a very peculiar dialect, which I thought he didn't really get too much into it, but I did think that that was an interesting thing to point out. And again, I think it almost points to your theory of the ship kind of having a little bit of Han's consciousness in it, maybe? I don't know.
Yeah, or just like Han is able to get out of situations because he's one with the Force and the Falcon is part of that.
You know, actually, I should get over this Yoda thing pretty quick, because this next moment is my bread and butter, because C-3PO does say he figured out what was wrong with the ship, and Han is really annoyed at him, but then he tells Chewie to start fixing that part.
He like whispers it so 3PO can't hear him.
Yeah. And we cut to Princess Leia. She's trying to fix some stuff too, and Han comes in and puts his arms around her to help her, and she shoves him away. And then she's like arguing with him a little bit. She hits her hand, and as they're arguing, he grabs it and he starts rubbing her hand.
I love it.
And he's like, come on, admit it. Sometimes you think I'm all right. And she's like, occasionally, when you're not a scoundrel. And then she tells him to stop rubbing her hand, and he's like, why? And she says, because my hands are dirty. And he says, my hands are dirty too. Why are you so afraid? And she's like, why do you think I'm afraid? And he says, you're trembling, which I was also trembling.
Kelly was also trembling.
And then he leans in real close. And I will say, as much as I love this scene, I'm a little particular about my romance in that I do think that she was kind of giving off a vibe that she was into it. But when somebody is pulling away and a little fearful, I don't love when the guy goes in for the kiss anyway. Not my favorite thing. And I feel like she was giving a little bit of like a I'm too scared to do this vibe, but I'm gonna put it out of my mind.
I think it's one of those things where, like, again, if this was real life, this behavior is inappropriate and this isn't okay.
Yeah.
And like, if you say no to something, the man should stop, regardless of what they think.
Lessons in consent with Leah and Kelly.
Yeah, like this is this isn't something that would be okay in real life. But I think that if you can separate that and enjoy this like made up scenario, then, you know, enjoy it.
No, absolutely. And I do think like the fictional part of me was totally loving it, because then he leans in really close and he's like, I think you need a scoundrel in your life. And then he kisses her.
Well, first she says, I like nice men. And he says, I'm a nice man.
I can't decide what threw me more, their kiss or Yoda's voice. So
I'm sure you liked the kiss more.
This was an intense section for me. I was sweating.
Because it was just back and forth between like Han and Leia, Yoda and Luke.
Yeah.
Han and Leia, Yoda and Luke.
Oh my gosh, my heart can't take it. But actually, an even better moment somehow happens while he is kissing her. C-3PO runs into the room. He starts tapping on Han, literally mid-making out. They're kissing. And C-3PO's like, hey, guess what? I fixed this one thing. It's really good. And then Han finally pulls away. Leia like runs and hides basically. And Han is like, thanks. And then C-3PO's like, yeah, sure, man, no problem.
Glad to be of help.
Oh my goodness. So many incredible moments. Like, I have to say, I am loving experiencing this for the first time. If I knew any of this would happen, I don't think I would be enjoying this section as thoroughly and intensely as I am enjoying it right now.
Oh, good.
This movie is already, well, I mean, it's hard to say that when there's at least 9 movies, but this one's my favorite so far.
It does have all the love, I will say.
Oh no, there's not going to be more love.
There is definitely more love, but I'm saying like this is like a lot of love.
Okay.
Actually, on the cover of this movie, I'm pretty sure it's Han and Leia kissing.
No way.
I'm pretty sure it is, yeah.
Wow. Okay, well, I'm glad I didn't see the cover, because that would have knocked me for a loop.
Been a spoiler.
Yeah, a little mini spoiler there. But anyway, back to the Imperial Army. I guess it's the Admiral that's talking to Darth at this point, and he says that they kind of went through the asteroid field and there's no way that they survived. And Darth is like, nope, they're definitely alive. You got to find them. And then a part that I kind of missed a little bit, it seems like they said something about how the rebels want to speak to him, and he said to move the ship out of the asteroid field so he can send a clear communication.
He didn't say the rebels. He said the Emperor wants to speak to him.
Oh, I thought because I wrote down the enemy wants to talk.
No, Emperor.
So that hooded guy is the Emperor?
Yes.
Ew. Okay. He's a little shriveled for, I thought the Emperor would be like a big powerful, but I don't know. This is just first impressions. So anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. Darth goes up to this hologram thing and he says, "What is thy bidding, my master?" Which, love that language. Very incredible. And it is this evil hooded guy who I now know is the Emperor. And he says that there's a disturbance in the Force. And I wanted to ask you, the evil Kermit meme that's always like, do it, is that supposed to be the Emperor?
I think so, yes.
Okay. Yeah, because he's just like some hooded guy.
Yeah.
Ooh, I wonder if he has the Force. Well, no, he must, because he can feel the Force. So I guess he's into it. Okay. Well, he does say that there's one specific guy doing it and that he is the offspring of Anakin Skywalker. And Darth is like, how is that possible? And the Emperor says, look into yourself and you'll know that it's possible. And he says that he could destroy us. And Darth actually counters and says he's just a boy, but the Emperor says the Force is strong with him, and since he's the son of a Skywalker, he can't become a Jedi. They can't let that happen. And Darth is, I don't know if he's trying to keep the Emperor from wanting to kill him, or if it's just an idea that occurs to him in the conversation, because he points out that he could make a really good ally. And he says he will join us or die.
Dun, dun, dun. Scary.
Dun, dun, dun. Ooh, and I feel like all the foreshadowing in this section is making me think that Luke is going to be very tempted by the dark side and he might join for a little bit.
It's possible.
So that's another official prediction of mine that I'm going to throw out there. So 2 official predictions of the movie so far. 1, Han and Leia are going to end up together by the end of the series. And 2, I think Luke is going to be flirting with the dark side.
It's possible.
So then we cut back to this planet with Yoda, the little bog planet, as I keep calling it. And it is raining. And R2 is straight up not having a good time.
He did not stay at the camp either. He followed. Did not listen.
He followed and he's stuck outside. And it looks like they're in Yoda's little house, which, again, a little reminiscent of Lord of the Rings. Very small place, and Luke keeps on hitting his head.
Yeah, it looks like a hobbit hole.
You seem to have themes in the things that you love the most. They're all a little similar. And I think actually at this point, I remembered that Yoda had the voice again, so I started getting a little overwhelmed again with excitement and laughter. But I think that Luke asks if they can either let R2-D2 in or if they could feed him or something, and Yoda's like, not yet, you eat first, something like that. And then Luke is getting impatient. He asks how far away Yoda is, and Yoda is answering, oh, he's not far at all. And then he asks Luke why he wants to be a Jedi, and Luke says, I don't know, I guess because of my dad. And Yoda is like, oh yeah, your dad was super powerful. And Luke is like, how would you know who my dad is? You don't even know who I am. And then he starts getting really worked up, and he's like, I'm wasting my time, I shouldn't even be here, I gotta go. And then Yoda, I thought for a second he was breaking the fourth wall, because he kind of looks at us and he's like, I can't teach him. And I'm like, oh, I'm sorry, Yoda, but somebody answers.
Who was it?
And it is Obi. And he says he will learn patience. And at this point, you could see in the background that Luke also hears him. So Luke is very quickly coming to the realization that this little gremlin creature is Yoda. And Yoda is like, you're not ready. And then Luke, upon this realization, is like, no, I'm totally 100% ready. And Yoda is not having it. He's like, you need to have a serious commitment. You're being reckless. You're impatient. And Obi interrupts and he was like, hey, when you started teaching me, I was like this too. And Yoda's really resistant. He's like, oh, well, he's also too old to start training. And Luke is like, well, I've learned a lot. And I think Luke started crying at this point, because I don't know if that was sweat or tears, but there was something rolling down his face.
I think it was probably a combo. But it's just so interesting how like quickly his demeanor changes as soon as he realizes that this is who he wants. Han. It's like he's been so rude to this guy, and then all of a sudden he's like, oh my God, he's Yoda. And I really like how Yoda puts him in his place. He's like, I've been watching you for a long time. You're never present. You're always thinking about the future and the next adventure. You're never like here in the moment. You're not going to be a good Jedi like that. You don't have the patience for it.
I think if anything, this conversation and this shift in tone from Luke really just highlights how immature and not ready he is, which, as we find out at the end of this section, it turns out Yoda was right. He was not ready for this. And, you know, seeing how he can't extend this respect and courtesy to anyone who is not explicitly there to help him just highlights that, you know, he's not ready to be a Jedi.
Yeah.
So I totally agree with him. But Luke is saying he's not afraid, and Yoda says, you will be, which I loved.
Scary.
So then we are back to the asteroid that the Millennium Falcon has landed on. I'm struggling. And Leia's sitting around, she's listening to the blasts, and she sees something fly overhead, and she looks out the window, and it's like a pterodactyl leech kind of looking guy.
Yeah.
And so she screams, she runs into the other room, she tells Han, and he says he's gonna go check it out. Leia says she's coming too, and Chewie is getting his gun, he's getting ready, and C-3PO is like, I'm gonna stay and guard the ship.
You mean Kelly says, I'm gonna stay and guard the ship.
I was just gonna say, that's me.
Yep.
100% can relate. So don't ever take me on an adventure, although I'll be great at waiting for you to come back.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of foreshadowing of what's going on here, and I did have a guess as to what it was going to be because I've seen SpongeBob before. So I had an inkling of what was going to happen.
Yeah.
So they're walking out of the ship and they're like, this cave is really moist. And it's a little sticky and it doesn't feel like it's made of rock. And they see a monster chewing on the cables. Han shoots him down. And like I said, there's like these little pterodactyl leeches.
Minox.
Okay. So they're fluttering around. Everything's getting a little intense. They're getting kind of attacked by them. And Han gets a little bit of a feeling. And I had the same feeling at this point because I wrote, they're not on an asteroid, are they?
They're inside a mouth.
Yeah. Han shoots the ground and it moves. And he knows we got to get out of here. So then he grabs the two of them and he's like, yeah, let's go. Which I was actually kind of thinking is a little weird because when he goes onto the ship, he kind of pushes past Leia. I thought he was going to pull her into the ship. He actually pushes past her and is like, come on, we got to go. Which I thought was weird because yes, he's a scoundrel for sure. But I thought that they like had a little romance brewing and you would think that he's the kind of guy that would grab his lady first.
No, because she could take care of herself.
That's actually a great point.
Feminism.
She is an independent woman. She doesn't need him. So then Leia's kind of arguing with him and she's like, no, the Imperials are still out there. And he's like, we got to get out of here. And she's like, oh no, the cave is closing. And they fly out and it is not a cave. It is an Alaskan bullworm.
It sure is.
Yeah, so they were actually in the mouth of some sort of worm monster creature. So they get out of there, thank goodness. And then we cut back to Luke.
Muscle T Luke, my favorite Luke, with the muscle T and the arms.
Oh my gosh.
My fave.
Oh, of course you would. It seems like he is starting his training. So he's got Yoda on his back doing a little piggyback ride. Luke is asking him some questions and he asks if the dark side is stronger. And Yoda says, no, it's not stronger, but it is quicker and it's also more seductive, which again, I felt was a little foreshadowing as to how Luke might experience it. And he also says a quote that I really liked where he said, a Jedi uses the Force for knowledge and defense, never for attack. And I was trying to think about how Obi has used the Force in the first movie versus how Luke has been using the Force so far. And I do think it is interesting to see that Luke is quicker to use the Force for fighting, whereas it seemed like, at least in the first movie, Obi was using it as a way to deter people from fighting.
Yeah, that's true.
So I thought that was a really interesting juxtaposition, and I like that Yoda was telling him, like, this is not what you're supposed to be using it for. You're doing all this training, but you don't want to be an attacker.
Yeah, that's a good point. I like that.
Yeah, thank you. Listen,
you're welcome.
I'm gonna find the symbolism in everything. So then there's I didn't know at first if it was a cave or maybe just like a little dark area, but Luke sees it and he says something's not right. He feels cold and death. And Yoda says that there's a strong force over there from the dark side and that he has to go in, but he doesn't need his weapons. So Luke heads into this dark, evil section of the forest, and R2-D2 beeping in the background. He is not pleased. He doesn't think it's a good idea. Nope. So Luke is wandering through the cave. We see all these like little skittering creatures running amok. There's this great iguana, which I would have stopped and petted. And we get some snakes, all that stuff. And then it starts happening in slow motion. And I was just pulled out of it completely because the frame rate is incredibly slow at this moment. And it's just so choppy.
Yes, that's the 80s.
But he sees Darth Vader approaching and he's walking towards him very slowly. Luke backs up. He pulls out his lightsaber and they start getting into a lightsaber battle. And I'm very excited, but I knew at this point that it wasn't the real Darth or it was like a mirage or something. But Luke actually hits him in the head and beheads him. And then he looks down at the helmet and it explodes a little bit. And we see the mask has been removed and it's actually Luke's face underneath the helmet. And then we see a quick shot of Yoda waiting outside and he looks disappointed. So whatever happened in that cave, Luke did not do a good job.
Yeah, I think like the symbolism of it is basically Luke was seeing the future in which he chooses the dark side.
That's interesting because I was thinking, knowing the spoiler again, that Darth is his father, I was thinking that this was a little bit of foreshadowing that he is related to Darth Vader.
Yeah, I think it's like a combo of the two.
Yeah. So back to the Imperial ship, he's actually got some bounty hunters on the ship. And it actually seems like some of the soldiers are not pleased about it because they're not a big fan of the bounty hunters. And we get some interesting looking characters, which I'm sure we'll see more of them as they try to hunt down people. Yeah. But we've got like a little raptor kind of guy. We have this one guy who looks like he's doing a whole deep diving excursion, little diving astronaut kind of suit.
Yes.
And Darth is speaking to them and he tells them that there's a great reward for whoever finds the Millennium Falcon, and they can use whatever methods they can think of, but they have to bring them back alive. And he said no disintegrations. So I thought that was also interesting because to me, and maybe this is just in general, when you kill people in the future, or I guess this is in the past because it was a long time ago.
In a galaxy far, far away.
The Jedi specifically disintegrate when they die, as you've told me. So if he's saying no disintegrations, he knows that there are Jedi, or he thinks, I guess I should say, that there are Jedi on board.
Potentially, yeah.
So then we cut to the Falcon, and it's coming out of the asteroid field, and Han is getting ready for light speed, and he presses the button or the lever or whatever it is, and nothing happens. And Chewie starts instigating, and he's yelling at Han. Han's yelling back at him. They're getting shot at. All this stuff is happening. C-3PO naturally is just bugging out, not having a good time. He starts talking about the odds again, and Leia's like, shut up. So he also does say that something in the back got hit, and if it has one more hit, then the ship is going to fall apart. So not looking good.
Yeah, it's like some sort of deflector shield or protection shield
thing. Yeah. So then Han starts maneuvering the ship in honestly a pretty impressive way. He's getting real close to the Star Destroyer, and the captain is watching, and they see it fly over, and then all of a sudden the ship is no longer in the scopes of the Star Destroyer, and they say we don't know where he is, and the captain says, well, that's impossible. A ship that small can't have a cloaking device, but they need to find him. And the captain actually even says something like, tell Lord Vader I take full responsibility for losing it. We're gonna figure this out, and don't worry, that'll come into play later.
We'll find out what happens to him. That guy's name was Captain Nita.
Okay. Well, he does not survive this section. So.
He does not. No.
Didn't write down his name. But anyway, back to Luke again, training. And I wrote down, I guess he's done with the cave. We didn't really see the fallout of it, but I guess presumably he failed whatever test was waiting for him in the cave and it was not good. So now he needs to keep on training. But he's doing handstands. He's levitating some rocks and it seems like he's doing a good job. But then he sees or hears his fighter jet sinking further into the bog and he gets distracted. He loses focus and he's like, oh, we'll never get to leave now. And Yoda, who's annoyed because he fell over, is like, well, you can use the Force to get it out. And Luke at first just doesn't believe him. And he's like, this is different from levitating rocks. This is a whole ship. And Yoda's like, well, I mean, you could do it. There's really no difference. And Luke is like, all right, fine, I'll try. And Yoda says, no try. Do or do not. There is no try.
Yes.
Which is another quote that I have heard many, many a time in my life. And I did not know that that was from Star Wars, but that is a really good one.
Yes, I love that quote.
But it turns out that he actually can't do it. He does try to pull the ship out. It seems promising at first, but no, he can't do it. And he says it's too big. And Yoda says, as Leah pointed out, size matters not. And then he says, do you judge me by my size? Which at this point, then I really started to think about Yoda beyond just his voice. I was like, we need to have a discussion. But then I'm immediately proven wrong. But let me tell you what I wanted to have a discussion about originally. Because I was thinking, we're not judging you for your size. What have you done so far? All you're doing is sitting on his back and spouting things at him. You're just sitting there. What do you do?
But he did say he trained Jedi Masters for 800 years. And Obi sent him there. He trained Obi.
Yeah, but I'm like, but what are you doing? I mean, you can also just hire a personal trainer.
He's the only Jedi Master left.
Okay, I guess that's fair. Well, we do find out almost immediately that he is incredibly powerful, but I mean, so far his training just consists of sitting there and watching Luke do cardio.
You know what, Kelly? You gotta have some patience. You'll never be a Jedi.
I would never be a Jedi. That is correct. I will never, ever be a Jedi.
You are failing the test.
I do not have the strength. I do not have the patience. Listen, I'm not even going on the adventure. I'm going to be waiting at home. I'll see you when you get back, okay? If you come back.
Maybe.
But yeah, so Yoda gives this whole motivational speech, but Luke gets mad and he storms off and then he just goes and like sits a few feet away in his anger because there's really not that many places to go in this bog planet, I guess. And then Yoda immediately proves me wrong and he uses the Force to pull the ship out of the bog. And I'm like,
yes,
okay, never mind. He does stuff. He's strong. Take it back.
Size matters not, Kelly.
Don't do the voice. I'm not ready yet. I'm not ready yet.
Okay. Still traumatized.
Can't handle it. I'm still a little upset about that happening. So R2-D2 kind of beeps out calling for Luke and Luke comes back and he sees what's happening. And I noted that Luke does not thank him. He just comes up to him and he's like, I don't believe it. And then Yoda's like, that's why you fail. And then I wrote in all caps, boom, roasted.
Boom, roasted is right.
Yeah, that is why you fail, okay? But seriously, he should have just said thank you. A little thank you goes a long way. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So whatever, it is what it is. Meanwhile, we see our dear friend, the captain, whose name you just said, but I didn't bother writing down because he does not survive.
R.I.P. Captain Nita.
He's getting choked out by Vader. So it seems like that is the general punishment for failure, is getting choked by Vader and killed. So then once he dies and collapses at his feet, Darth is like, thank you. I accept your apology, Captain, which I thought was a great little moment. And then the Admiral comes up and he kind of explains what's going on. And he's like, well, if they use the light speed or went into light speed, I guess, then they could be across the galaxy by now. So Darth is pissed and he's like, you have to calculate every possible trajectory. We're going to find him. And then he tells the Admiral, don't fail me again, which is very ominous.
And that Admiral is looking scared.
I would be scared too. I mean, listen, it's not only his job on the line, but it is his life. and his
Yes.
ability to breathe.
Yes.
So not an ideal situation. I would not want to work for Darth Vader.
Nope, me neither.
But then we see that it turns out that the Falcon is on the ship. It's just chilling on the ship like a little barnacle. And
smart.
I think that was brilliant. And
too.
C-3PO does not agree with me. He thinks it's a bad idea. And he actually says, surrender is it's not a terrible idea. Which again, I'm like, C-3PO, whose side are you on? Whose side are you on?
I'm sure you loved what Leia did next. He's like in the middle of screaming and she goes and she shuts him down.
How did I not notice that?
I don't know, but it happened.
Well, Han has this really great idea to just stay clinging onto the ship until the ship goes into light speed, because right before they go into light speed, they discard all of their garbage. So at that point, they could just detach and look like they're kind of part of the garbage floating away. Then I actually missed a good amount of this conversation. Not that I missed it. I was listening to it, but I wasn't fully following. But there's a guy named Lando that Han wants to go to, and Leia's asking about him, and Han says he's a scoundrel, and he says you'd like him, and Leia's like, oh, thanks. A little moment again there where she is remembering the kiss for sure. He's kind of going back and forth on if Lando's gonna be a good guy. Like, he says that he's an old friend, but he says he can't trust him, so it seems like we're gonna go into this plan. And then Leia gives him a little kiss on the cheek.
It was
which,
so cute.
Again, I was a little surprised by.
Yeah.
And so that little kiss is because the garbage plan does work. So they are discarded with the garbage, and it actually looks like there was something else that was discarded with the garbage. That's a little ship. And I have to assume that that is not someone in the Imperial Army, because if it was a bad guy, wouldn't they just immediately alert Darth and let him know, I found the Falcon?
They did actually do a close-up of the person driving that ship. It was the guy that you called the astronaut guy. He was one of the bounty hunters.
Oh, okay. So it was one of the bounty hunters then.
Yes.
I guess he just wants his bounty because he is not telling Darth. Okay.
Well, because, he's got to catch him first, because if he alerts the ship, then all the other bounty hunters will know.
That's true. That's a good point. Well, that's a stupid idea, because I can't imagine that that's going to work in his favor. But then we cut back once more to Luke. He's training. He seems to be getting better, though, because now he's able to lift bigger things. And while he's doing it, Yoda mentions that he's going to be able to see all sorts of things in the Force, like the future and the past and friends. And Luke thinks of Han and Leia, and he loses control again. And Luke tells him that he saw a city in the clouds and that his friends are in pain. And Yoda says, well, you're seeing the future. And Luke says, will they die? And Yoda says it's hard to see because the future is always in motion, so anything can change. And then Luke says he's got to go and he's got to help them. And Yoda is very adamant about him not leaving. He says if you leave now, you're gonna destroy everything that they've fought for. So then we come back to the Falcon again pretty quickly, and then don't worry, we'll go back to another tense moment in the bog. But on the Falcon, Han is on this new planet, and it looks like this is a planet in the clouds. So a little bit of foreshadowing that they are potentially gonna come into some trouble there, but they're being shot at. Han's trying to land and he's not getting clearance to land. He doesn't have a permit, and it's starting to be a questionable situation, but then he does get approval to land, and we have this really cool floating city in the clouds. Absolutely loved it.
It is a really cool scene. Yeah.
I would love to live there. Very fun looking place. So they land on this port and it's completely empty. Leia's immediately suspicious, and Han is like, no, it's fine. And then the door opens from the port and he's like, see, there's my friend.
Before this though, like when they're still on the ship, Chewie says something to Han, but obviously we don't know what Chewie says. And Han responds and he says, oh, it's fine. That was a really long time ago. I'm sure he's forgotten. So that was like a little foreshadowing too of like, is Lando a friend? How is he going to be greeted? Little questionable.
Ooh, interesting, because I kind of took it to be almost like a little funny joke thing. Like I was imagining Chewie might have said something along the lines of like, didn't you sleep with his girlfriend? And then Han's like, no, I'm sure he doesn't remember that.
That's what I mean, is like Chewie was saying something that Han did wrong, and whatever it was, Han's like, oh yeah, he's definitely forgotten that. It's fine. He's my bestie.
Well, It is a very interesting dynamic we have because we do see Lando and he comes up to him and he's like, you got a lot of guts coming here. And he calls him like a slimy, no good pirate or something like that. And then they hug.
Yeah.
So I guess they're friends.
They're fine.
And he asks Han what he needs. And Han's like, oh, we need to repair the ship. And Lando actually refers to the Falcon as his ship. And Han is like, no, you lost it fair and square. So that's another little interesting thing.
In a game of cards.
Not an ideal way to lose a ship. I would not gamble my car with you for any reason.
No.
And I would not accept that.
But Lando did it and he lost.
And then Lando sees Leia and he's like, oh, who's this? And he starts hitting on her a little bit and she's actually kind of receptive to it. And then Han gets annoyed and he kind of like pulls her away. So kind of a funny little moment there. And then they walk in, the two friends are catching up. Lando's explaining, you know, how he's been doing and he seems to now be a pretty legitimate guy. You know, Han referred to him as a pirate at one point, but he's got this gas mine now and he's, you know, talking all this business stuff about how he's got issues with his employees, he's got issues with the gas, the mining, that kind of stuff. So, you know, he seems to be on the straight and narrow now. And then C-3PO is following and there's this kind of elevator looking door that opens and there's another droid that looks like him. It's like the silver version of him. And he's like, oh, nice to see a familiar face. And the droid says something. And here's where I got a little confused because I do have subtitles on. It sounded like the droid said intruder.
No, he spoke a different language.
He said something, okay, it sounded like Latin, or not sounded like, but it looked like, I don't know, Latin. And then C-3PO's like, oh, how rude. So if I hadn't been watching that on subtitles, I would have thought he said intruder. But then he walks into this room that kind of looks like a control panel. There's like a bunch of wires in there. And somebody off screen is like, who are you? And C-3PO is like, oh, sorry to intrude. No, don't get up. And then whoever it is, I don't think we saw him, but whoever it is blasts him. And I wrote in all caps, looks like his arm got shot off. Could this be number 5 on the list?
Could this be number 5? I think his arm did get shot off. I think you might be right about that.
I'm going to count it for now, but we could retract it in the next section. And then Chewie seems to double back. I guess he's looking for C-3PO. The door is closed now, and then he just kind of lets out a whimper and walks away. So I don't know how that's going to come into play, but we do end on this next scene, which is the last section of today's episode, where Luke is getting ready to leave, and Yoda's still trying to convince him to stay and it's not working, and Obi appears again and he says that it's a dangerous time for Luke. So basically kind of implies that if Luke leaves now, then he's going to be very tempted by the dark side. And Yoda reminds him of his failure in the cave and Luke is like, well, I've learned so much since then, which I thought was very ironic because what has it been, like an hour?
The time is, it's definitely unclear how long it's been.
It doesn't seem like it's been that long. Yeah, because we're also intercutting with the situation with Han and Leia, and it seems like it's been maximum an hour.
And then with Luke, it's like, has he been there for months or has he been there for hours?
I hate when training montages seem to be like over the course of one day instead of over the course of years.
Yeah.
It's just so unrealistic. But yeah, so Obi says he thinks he's going to lose him to the dark side. And Yoda says, if you end your training now, you'll become an agent of evil. And Luke just still does not agree with them. And he's like, you want me to sacrifice Han and Leia? And Yoda's like, honestly, yeah. If you stand for what they're fighting for, then yes, you'll let them sacrifice themselves for the greater good.
That's where I got choked up on that line.
You know what? I should have guessed that. I was just busy crying because I couldn't take Yoda seriously. But his voice did get a little bit more serious. I think if he sounded like this when I first was introduced to him, I wouldn't have cracked up so much. But it was just hilarious. But anyway, at this point, it seems like Obi and Yoda are just accepting that Luke is going to go no matter what. So they start to kind of give him a little bit of advice. Obi tells him, don't give in to hate. And Luke is like, I promise I'm going to come back, but he does ultimately take off. And then Yoda's like, see, I was right. He's reckless. And Obi says, that boy is our last hope. And then we finish with the final line of Yoda saying, no, there is another.
Ooh.
Which is crazy. Who's it going to be?
Who's the other?
Who
Exciting.
is the other? So we are approaching the end of the film now. Our next episode is going to be the final episode of episode 5. I just said episode like 8 times in that sentence. So
Episode.
But that next section of the film will be our last section of the film. We only have about 45 minutes left.
Yeah.
So what's going to happen?
Any final predictions?
Let me make some guesses and think about where we are right now. So with Lando, I have to say, based on your thoughts on him, I'm going to assume that there is going to be a betrayal by the end of the movie. Maybe Lando is going to let the Empire know that Han and Leia are there. Although I will say, I think it interesting that Leia did not introduce herself as royalty.
Princess,
she just said her name is Leia. So maybe he doesn't quite know who she is, which I think is good because we can't trust him.
No.
I do think that Luke is going to be tempted by the dark side, and maybe this particular film is going to end with him joining forces with them. I don't think it's going to be a permanent shift, but I do think that we're going to see him take sides with them for a minute. And I'm wondering if the I'm your father is going to come into play here. I actually don't know for sure if Luke and Darth are going to have any interactions in the rest of this movie, but if they are, then it's probably going to be Darth trying to convince him to join the dark side by saying, I'm your dad, you should really join me.
And how many more arms do you think we'll lose?
In this episode, at least one more. I think there's going to be a battle. Maybe Lando's going to lose his arm in the symbolic gesture of, betraying your friends. We should do an arm prediction. Is how many arms do you think will be lost in each movie? We'll do it for episode 6.
Well, I know.
I guess that's fair.
I love your predictions.
But yeah, so that is it for this week's episode. Join us next week for the final installment of Star Wars Episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back.
My
Leah's
favorite name.
name in all of the franchise.
See you next week. Bye.
We'll see you next week.
Bye.
Bye.
You've been listening to the It's All Geek to Me podcast, hosted by Leah and Kelly. Make sure to hit subscribe in your favorite podcast player and give us a rating. You can also follow us on Twitter at All Geek Podcast. New episodes drop every Thursday. See you next week.